from across the country. I'm Karl Zingheim. I'm the staff historian for the USS Midway Museum. And on behalf of Mac McLaughlin, our president and CEO, and the staff of the Midway, we'd like to welcome everyone here to our 4th annual Western Naval Historical Association Symposium on all things regarding naval history. I think you're going to be in for an intriguing and entertaining as well as exciting series of sessions on a wide variety of topics, both today and tomorrow. And for the benefit of our live audience as well, we'll also have some demonstrations on naval wargaming at the tabletop level as well. So just like as always with all of our presentations, the WNHA is about something for everyone. And I am confident that we're going to be able to deliver on that in this hybrid presentation we have today. With that, I'd like to hand things over to our president, Sam Tangredi, and we'll commence our proceedings today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karl. I am Sam Tangredi. I have the pleasure of having the exalted position of president of the Western Naval History Association. First, before I make remarks about the association, I want to thank Karl, the Dean of History here on Midway, and also Trevor Humphrey. Karl made a lot of the arrangements, and Trevor is our technical person. And we'd like to thank Midway Museum for being our venue, and they're very kind to allow us to do that. The Western Naval History Association was founded in 2019 when 3 individuals, Vince O'Hara, great author, Steve McLaughlin, and myself, lamented about the fact that there wasn't much activity as far as conferences, symposium on naval history on the West Coast. On the East Coast, you have the Newport, Annapolis, DC, Norfolk corridor, where there's a lot of conferences, a lot of activity. On the West Coast, you have the museums. You have this fine museum, and now we have a great museum there in San Pedro. USS Iowa is establishing the Surface Navy Museum, but we don't have a lot of conference activities gathering together. We want to create an association of intimate association of people who love naval history. Now, this is not an academic conference. Most of the conferences on the East Coast are, because we want to be inclusive. That's why we call it Expanding Naval History. This is our 4th annual symposium. First was held in Balboa Park, and then this one, the one after that here on Midway. Last year it was virtual. This year again on Midway, and we're trying to do a hybrid conference with presenters from the East Coast and other places who cannot attend, and those who could not attend, and a hybrid audience. Now, for organization, I would like to, they're not necessarily all physically present, but I'd like to tell you who our board members are. This is a completely voluntary organization, and board members include Vince O'Hara, author of perhaps 14 or so books on naval history. We have Steve McLaughlin, who is the expert on Russian and Soviet battleships, put out a great book, the definitive book on that. We have Jeremy Mazer, who is a Marine, now studying for his master's degree, and had a lot of experience there with the museum at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, the Command Museum. So then we have Cynthia Watson, who is attending virtually. She is the dean of the National War College there at National Defense University in Washington, D.C. Karl Zingheim is also on our board of directors. Now, we would invite all of you to become members, those in our audience. You notice that there is small dues, a small fee, but in reality, we just charge that because it pays for lunch here at our annual symposium, which is our big session. So if you become a member there, virtual people, we owe you lunch. Probably be In-N-Out Burger, but nevertheless, we owe you lunch. We have a great program coming up, and I want to talk a little bit about that. It is a great mix between authors, some academics, and some practitioners. We have the great pleasure of, as our keynote address, former Secretary of the Navy, John Lehman. Secretary Lehman is the author of 2 books, Command of the Sea, which is about his experience as Secretary of the Navy, and then more recently, Ocean Ventured, which talks about the preparations for the maritime strategy, operationalizing, executing the maritime strategy at sea. He also recently put out with Steve Wells a monograph concerning future of aircraft carriers, in which he makes a recommendation that instead of spending $13 billion on the successive Ford aircraft carriers, that the U.S. turn to build a smaller aircraft carrier the size of USS Midway, so that we can afford more aircraft carriers in the fleet. Yesterday, I was at a conference where the CNO laid out what he would like the Navy to be, and he said 12 aircraft carriers and 500 total ships, including unmanned. And then the question was asked, how can you get there from here? And he said, well, obviously, we need more money, and that's up to Congress. I had the pleasure of serving in the U.S. Navy when Secretary of the Navy Lehman was the Secretary. It was the 600-ship Navy, and it was perhaps the period from after World War II that the U.S. Navy was the most powerful. I also had, you could call it pleasure, of serving in the Navy before that, what was called the Hollow Navy, the post-Vietnam Navy. And the difference between those two, truly amazing. And of course, that period is of the all-volunteer force, so it's a little bit different than some of the other eras of the Navy. Before I turn it over to Secretary Lehman, I want to tell you a little bit more about our program. We have today, coming virtually, John Parshall. You may know him because he's co-author of Shattered Sword, The Untold Story of the Battle of Midway, which has become kind of the definitive reference to Midway. It punctures some of the myths that has built up. And of course, Midway is seen by naval leadership as the battle that we are going to celebrate the most because of its significance in turning the tide of World War II. And right now there's a Midway Celebration Commission there in DC that is setting up those sort of events. Following him, we have Trent Hone, another fine author. Most recent book being Learning War, The Evolution of Fighting Doctrine in the U.S. Navy, 1898 to 1945. Trent has done a lot of work. Now, neither of them are professional authors. These are people who love the Navy, did the research, read these books, have a career outside of that. And so that's the sort of people that we try to collect here, those who love naval history and those who are contributing to preserving naval history. But we're not just about books, we're also about wargaming, modeling, some maritime art, and we would include, if there were any wreck divers who would want to join us, or perhaps even people who can sing sea shanties. We're hoping for that. Vince O'Hara is on the program, and Vince is actually going to do a workshop. Vince, in addition to being the author of so many books on naval history, and probably the U.S. expert on the naval war in the Mediterranean in World War II. For his books, he creates all of his own maps, and he's going to talk about how to create maps for publication or website. We have with us a team, the publishing team there from the Naval Institute Press, who have benefited from Vince's maps, and he's going to talk a little bit about how to do that. Following him, Mark Fiore. Mark is the Deputy Director of the Hatndorf Center for Maritime Historical Research at the Naval War College, where I also am employed. And he will talk a bit about something a bit different. Civil Engineering Corps in World War II, particularly Captain Wilfred L. Painter, who was a Civil Engineering Corps officer, but snuck behind Japanese lines to prepare to determine where we were going to place the logistics once we captured that particular island. Finally, well, two more. George Galderisi is going to be here. You might know George. George is a best-selling author. He has continued the Tom Clancy series, Op Center series. So you'll see Tom Clancy's Op Center, written by George Galderisi. He is also published with the Naval Institute Press, several books. He and I are co-editors of the book AI at War, Artificial Intelligence, Operationalizing Artificial Intelligence. He will be here giving a workshop on writing military fiction. So we're excited about that. Finally, Lonnie Gill, who's a charter member of Western Naval History Association and is the creator, author of one of the most important naval war games called General Quarters, will be here. He will be demonstrating, he and his team will be reenacting based on Navy signals intelligence. So we're pleased that Lonnie is here. Unfortunately, we probably can't broadcast that to the virtual audience. You have to come, and you have to come next year. We'd love to have you here. So I'm at the point that I would like to invite Secnab Lehman who is presenting virtually, to take command once again and begin his presentations. Trevor, do you raise hand?
Well, first, as you can see out my windows in the background here, I'm quite envious of where you guys are compared to where I am in Idaho, where it's about 10 degrees and we got lots of snow. So anyway, it really is an honor to be asked to address this group, because I know many of your members and participants. I have been a consumer of many of your books and articles and monographs. It's humbling as a consumer and an amateur historian to be part of this, because I don't think there's ever been a period in when the lessons of history are more important for dissemination and education of our leadership than it is now. Certainly, we all know as historians that history doesn't repeat itself, but it's by now a cliche that, well, it doesn't repeat itself, it certainly rhymes frequently. And from that, we can draw insights and lessons, the better to apply to the crises of the day. And today, of course, Ukraine is on everyone's mind. And so I want to address that as a good case study of why history can be so useful, and how the ignorance of history is increasingly evident in many of our political and other leaders. So I'm not going to address the whole problem or go into detail about Ukraine. You all read the papers and know what's going on, but it is a fine example of the failure of deterrence. And it certainly rings the bells of rhyming bells of the 30s, when we see as today the emergence of an axis of hostile powers, hostile to the West, and particularly the United States, just as we saw in the late 30s with Japan and Germany and Italy, the three of which had nothing really in common in what their objectives and their geopolitics were concerned, other than they had an adversary in the United States. But of course, this axis of today is proceeding much further than the axis of the 30s, with very serious efforts to coordinate and join forces in exercises, in wargaming, in weapons tactics and technology. And the response of the United States has been very similar to those of the allies in the 30s, replacing maintaining a balance of power with hopefulness and diplomacy and words instead of what is necessary to maintain deterrence, which is a balance, a visible, clear capability. And so today, there are many dimensions we could talk about in war game, but I just want to concentrate on the Navy today. What is wrong? What is responsible for the failure of deterrence, which is becoming so obvious? We are not convincing our adversaries that they have more to lose by taking violent action against us than they have to gain. They feel and they're not stupid people, they feel that we are not in a position to prevent them or to punish them in any way compared to the gains that they are quite clear in what they think they can achieve by the use of force. So let's start with what's wrong with the Navy. Number one, culture. I also want to talk about lack of strategy, and I want to talk about the procurement and disarmament we're engaged in. All of these are linked, and I raise culture first because that runs through as a source of our failures in the other two. Failure to maintain a clear and logical and powerful strategy. Failure to get procurement under control. We have lost control of procurement. Those of you who haven't read it, I strongly advise that you read Arnold Panero's recent book of last summer, The Ever-Shrinking Fighting Force, which puts the facts to the reality that while we are spending in constant dollar terms about the same as at the height of the Reagan administration, we are getting about a third of the value in terms of beans and bullets and technology that we got for the same dollars in the 80s. Why is that? Well, clearly these are very potentially complicated in their detail, but it's the major issues that we must deal with are very clear, and they're not that complicated. Let's talk about culture. I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post a few years ago when the book The Admirals came out. And I pointed out, this was the book about the 4 5-star admirals that won World War II for the United States. And I pointed out that not one of them, with the possible exception of Admiral Leahy, but the other three never would have got past lieutenant commander in today's Navy, because the Navy is out bragging about how the culture of the U.S. Navy is built on the fact that we pursue zero, literally zero tolerance of mistakes. And that is true. We all know very fine people that have been basically drummed out because they made a mistake or they were accused of making a mistake. And of course, that if you really want real leaders, risk takers who take very finely judged risk, you have to protect the emerging talented people, and the Navy does not do that today. They throw them out. And I mean, Nimitz put his first command on the rocks. Ernie King was a ladies' man and had, while he was married, several young ladies. And Halsey was known to drink a bit and got himself in trouble regularly as a junior officer. But in those days, the strong leadership in the Navy that was a fundamental part of the culture was able to recognize young emerging talent as the junior officers came to the fleet. And they knew that if they were going to succeed, no one succeeds without failing occasionally. And they would protect Nimitz. He would be punished and have to pay his dues, but he was not thrown out of the Navy, thank God. Today, it's inconceivable that the sins of those three eventually five-star admirals would be tolerated today, because we have zero tolerance in the Navy. We must change that, because driving out first-rate people, first-rate men and women who make all the difference in building a real strategy, in managing procurement, in preventing gold plating, and all the things that are wrong with the Navy today, I would trace, not to blame it on Congress or even my unfavorite quote reforms like Goldwater Nichols, but on the fact that we no longer provide the kind of adventurous and exciting careers, noble callings that young, talented people, men and women, are attracted to, and more importantly, want to stay in, because that's the biggest crisis we have today, even though it's covered up because the pure statistics don't show any great crisis in retention. But the crisis, the real crisis, is that the word at the academies and OCS and ROTC is five and jive. The retention of the best people is just not happening. And while there are numerous causes to it, with leadership in the Pentagon and the Navy, some of them proudly testifying and advertising in recruiting posters that our mission is to end the white supremacists, to fight the embedded racism in the services, to fight the forces that are creating environmental problems, and especially the warming of the planet and related weather problems. This is not what great leaders, yes, they share all those concerns, but that's not the mission that they intend to make their career on. And yet that is what we are projecting to the public, to Congress, and so forth. And this is misguided and has to be changed. So culture runs through every one of our problems. Let's talk a little bit about strategy. We don't have a strategy. We haven't had a clear naval strategy since the end of the Cold War. And of course, there are those who say, oh no, but today, after Goldwater Nichols, we have to have a joint strategy, not a maritime strategy. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. While certainly there has to be considerable thinking along joint lines, which roles and missions of each of the services has in different conditions. But the Navy has an obligation to have a naval strategy as to what it intends to do with the resources that are given to it in the crises that, for instance, we're now seeing. And there is no realism and there's no strategic framework that is logical, that has been promulgated and that anyone in the Navy understands. Today, the strategy, there's a lot of strategic thinking, a good deal of it, but it doesn't seem to penetrate any of the war plans or the public relations. It's essential that the Navy be able to explain in simple declarative sentences what it's going to do with these expensive systems that they're asking the taxpayer to fund. And just because jointness is the new religion and everything needs to be couched in joint terms doesn't mean that the Navy is exempt from having its own clear maritime strategy to win and hence to be able to deter. And not alone. The Navy's never operated alone. But that doesn't mean that the religion, an obsession with jointness, which implies that every strategy has to include a role for the Army and the Air Force and the Marines and the Navy and the Coast Guard. This is absurd, and it's totally smothered real sound strategic thinking. In the 80s, our naval strategy was certainly joint where it was applicable. We worked with the Air Force to equip them with harpoons and mine laying. We needed the F-15s in areas close in to the Soviet Union, and we depended on them. We used AWACS, we used Air Force tankers. We certainly depended on the Army for certain areas in the periphery that had to be dealt with. But to pretend that there is a need for every service in the middle of the Pacific Ocean is just such a distortion of logic. And after all, strategy is logic. That's what it's built on. And if it's not simple and explainable, it is not valid. And, we are substituting strategic thinking for freedom of navigation. Who thinks that if this escalates in Ukraine, that we're going to be dealing with it by sending destroyers into the Black Sea? That's absurd. We have abilities to affect that particular theater, but the great value of the maritime strategy in the 80s was we demonstrated to the Russians what we really were going to do in time of war and how we were going to do it, to demonstrate to them that we were going to kick their ass at sea. And there was no way they could stop us. And they finally realized that, as there's all of the record that we became available after the Cold War was over now demonstrates. One of the most important reasons that the Cold War came to an end when it did was that the military, the Navy particularly, and the Air Force in Russia came to the Politburo and said that we can't defend the country unless you treble our budget. And when that got to Gorbachev, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because we were demonstrating every year that we were getting better and better, and they couldn't keep up, and that we were defeating them in even in all of their own war games. They were unable to cope with what we were doing all over the world, not just in the Norwegian Sea and the North Cape. So that's strategy. And today, the only place I see it being really done is in the Marine Corps, because the strategy that we used so effectively to win the Cold War is not the strategy that we need to deal with China, or more importantly, deal with the tripartite axis that is likely to be engaged in a combat against us. And so there is clear strategy imperatives, but it's not just rebuilding the maritime strategy in the 80s. It's a whole different time and environment, and yet, other than individuals, and I applaud the strategy discussion group, which a predecessor of it in the 70s was one of the important sources of what came to be the maritime strategy, the forward strategy of the 80s. There's a lot of good discussion in the SDG today, a lot of good discussion up in Newport and out in San Diego, but it's not, the leadership of the Navy has not yet demonstrated that it understands the fundamental importance of having a strategy that is explainable to the American people and to our adversaries, so that they understand we can beat them. We are better. We're better technologically. We have the historic strength of traditions and practices that they can only envy. We're not using it. And of course, this is also visible in procurement. Procurement has become a shambles. It's become, thanks to various reforms, and especially including Goldwater Nichols, where everything has to be joint. Everything's a joint requirement. The JROCs all have to be involved in deciding how fast the LCS should go and how much electricity the forge should have, and so we've been for the last several decades designing camels by committee, and that's crazy. And as a result, we are disarming as we spend more money. We're getting a third of the output that we got in the 80s. And but everything is joint. Every service has a chance to input on what kind of aircraft should be on our carrier decks, whether we need carriers or not, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got to get back control of Navy procurement and stop pandering to the academics and the armchair strategists in the Beltway for what we need, where the R&D should be, which weapon systems we have to procure, and then take responsibility and reestablish line authority and accountability in project management. This embarrassing worldwide fiasco of the Ford. Who gets fired for that? Anybody? Does anybody know anybody who got fired from this 15-year project of failure? No, because it's all by committee. And so it doesn't matter how grotesque the camel that comes out the other end. And it's not just the Navy that is suffering from this, all the services. You know, in a prior era, we, from the back of an envelope, literally, with the idea of Polaris and Minuteman in the Air Force, it took 4 years from that envelope until the first deployment of the George Washington. Today, the average system takes 24 years from start to finish. It takes 5.5 years, of course, if you follow the defense acquisition regulation, 5.5 years to get a joint requirement paper to even start a program. Well, this is crazy, and it's going to lead to very serious problems, is leading to very serious problems in the future. So to sum up, and I hope we have time for a few questions, the first thing we've got to worry about in the Navy is replace this politically correct culture with zero tolerance, with no junior officers living on base because they don't want to be seen having a drink, with the end with no more officers clubs, let alone AC/DC clubs and chiefs clubs and all the things that make an elite corps bond and keep the best people wanting to be part of this organization. We've lost a lot of that. And there are many other areas of the culture that, you know, we could all spend time whinging about, especially if there's still an O Club around San Diego. But let's talk about strategy. How do we get strategy back? It's the Navy's responsibility. Okay, so you have to play the joint game, you have to go through the motions and so forth, but that doesn't exempt the Navy from blame for not having a strategy. The Navy's always had a strategy. As Admiral Nimitz said after World War II, he never fought a battle in the Pacific that he had not war gamed under the orange strategy in the 30s. There's never not been a Navy strategy until really Goldwater Nichols. Well, we've got to get back to strategic thinking and disciplining our procurement according to those requirements that the strategy provide us. So, and last, procurement. There's no excuse for the chaos in our procurement programs. It's exemptions. Everybody uses the excuse. Oh well, but they're look at the reforms. Look at all this OSD, new bureaucracy, which now has taken over so much of the responsibility for procurement. Baloney. Ash Carter told me he spent 90% of his time in granting exemptions to the defense acquisition regulations to get things out to the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and to get the answer to the IEDs. So it's possible not to be strangled by this 25-year cycle that a huge bureaucracy likes to impose. It is, management by bureaucracy and committee is fatal. It's going to destroy our capability to maintain deterrence. And yet, you don't have to obey it slavishly. Bureaucracy is all about process. You don't get in trouble if you follow the process. But to have leaders who are not afraid to take the bull by the horns and to get waivers where they need them, to impose line discipline, to discipline people who fail, and reward people who are succeeding, is a fundamental, and we have to get back to that. So I'm inherently an optimist, and I don't think that there are any of these problems that I've laid out. Learning the lessons of history that we cannot deal with before it's too late. It may take a real smack in the teeth like Pearl Harbor, but ultimately we can apply common sense and leadership and accountability to providing for our common defense. So that's why I'm happy to be among all my fellow, as an amateur historian, my fellow historians and consumers of good history. And I urge you all to keep up the tremendous job you've been doing in calling out these lessons of history. What went wrong in the Pacific? What went wrong in World War I naval strategy? What went wrong in dealing with the menace of the U-boats in 1942, and so forth? So with that, I wish I was with you, but I'm very proud and honored that I was able to have this much time with you all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We've come to the end of our time for your presentation, but we want to thank you very heartily for being part of our symposium. And we hope that you will continue to be a part of our activities in the future. Thank you so much.
Does that mean I get a free lunch when I come out to San Diego next time?
If you pay your dues, sir.
Okay, I will.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.